October by Professor Dimitris Christopoulos. And if you recall, Professor Christopoulos was in Melbourne last year towards the end of the sort of seminar series. He's been following the trial of Golden Dawn quite closely, and the topic of his seminar will be the day after the Golden Dawn trial. So a monumental event in Greece's history, and to get an update on it, we have Professor Christopoulos next week. It's a joint event also with the Greek community of New South Wales. So that's next Wednesday, 7 p.m. You should have already received an email, those who are on our database. And the second seminar next week is on our standard Thursday, Memory Mapping and Historic Greek Communities of Istanbul by Dr. Gönül Bozoğlu. So 2 seminars next week, back to back. So keep an eye out for both of them. Also, just a reminder that for those who have registered through Zoom, towards the end of the seminar, I will be putting a request for questions. You can use the chat function or the Q&A function, as can those who are on sort of Facebook or YouTube as well. And also just a reminder that with all questions must be respectful of the speaker and topic. If not, they won't be conveyed. But we will try and get through as many questions as possible as time permits. Now let's begin tonight's seminar entitled In Search for the Lost Greek Infinitive in Anatolia, a talk on the Pontian language by Dr. Ioanna Sitaridou. But before I say a few words about tonight's topic, allow me to thank the sponsor of tonight's seminar, the Pontian Community of Melbourne, Victoria, and may also give a plug to their newly commenced initiative, online tutorial classes for those interested in learning the Pontian dialect. These classes are on every Wednesday or Thursday evening, 6 to 7 p.m, and are given by Thessaloniki-based philologist and educator, Yota Yokimidou. For those interested, I'll circulate the community's email in the chat function. Now let's return to tonight's topic. Although dwindling, Greek is still spoken by several groups in Turkey. They are the remaining Orthodox communities of Greek speakers in Istanbul and the islands of Imbros and Tenidos. They're also the descendants of Muslim Cretans scattered around various parts of Turkey. But tonight's seminar will focus on Romeyka, the last surviving variety of Greek spoken in northeastern Turkey, in the area traditionally known as Pontos. And although this vernacular has been called by a variety of names like Pontic Greek, Muslim Pontic, Rumja, the remaining actual speakers refer to it as Romeyka. And I stress remaining speakers as it's an endangered language. UNESCO have classified it as definitely endangered, and the Encyclopedia of the World's Endangered Languages classified as severely endangered. It's under threat, just like many other vernaculars, due to the universality of education and widespread access, dominance, and the use of major language, in this case, Turkish. Furthermore, greater mobility and easier access to transport modes, the communication technology revolution that we're undergoing has significantly decreased the isolation of native speakers and has reduced the transmission to younger generation speakers. And this is quite paramount if the language continues in the future. And although it's on the brink of extinction, there's a rush by researchers and linguists to document and understand it. This is the focus of tonight's presentation, and we warmly welcome Dr. Ioanna Sitaridou from Thessaloniki. Welcome, Ioanna. A bit of background on Ioanna. She was born and raised in Thessaloniki. She's a reader in Spanish and Historical Linguistics in the Faculty of Modern Medieval Languages and Linguistics at the University of Cambridge in the UK. She holds a BA in French Philology from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. She then moved to the UK where she completed an MA in Linguistics at University College London, which was then followed by a PhD in Romance Linguistics at the University of Manchester. Actually, she speaks virtually all Romance languages. Her main areas of research are comparative and diachronic syntax of the Romance languages, in particular 13th century Spanish, as well as dialectal Spanish. For quite some time now, she has been working on Romeyka, and her work here has received both national and international publicity. I urge you all to visit the website created around it, which I will share later on. I'll now pass on the baton to Ioanna. The floor is yours, Ioanna.
Thank you very much for this great presentation. In fact, the contextualization of my research is the best that has been done so far. Not even my fellow colleagues haven't made such a good introduction. So thank you very much. It gives me a great pleasure to be able to give this talk for you. And hopefully perhaps one day in the future, in the not too far future, I could actually meet you in person. So I'm going to start my presentation, and now I'm going to share my screen so that you can see what I have prepared for you. I hope it is okay. So as Nick said, tonight I will be talking about my research in today's Turkey, in this remote part of Turkey, and I'm going to explain why this research has been quite important, both for me personally, but actually I think because it allows us to understand aspects of the diachrony of Greek which were previously unknown or not so well understood. But before anything else, let me actually explain how I got into this, because as Nick said in his introduction, in his very kind introduction of me, I am a trained Romanist. I study Romance languages. I have been doing all my research on the Romance languages. But that all actually started to change when I went to Oxford back in 2006 to give an invited talk. And it was indeed a talk on a very peculiar, very particular type of infinitive found in Spanish and Portuguese. And I remember it very well, like it was yesterday, as we say, that when I was approached by Professor Peter Mackridge from Oxford, who was attending my talk, and he introduced himself to me, and he said, well, actually, now that I have attended your talk, I think we can finally understand the Pontic Greek infinitive. And at that stage, my reaction was, Professor Mackridge, what are you talking about? There's no survival of the infinitive in Pontic Greek. And then he said to me, well, this is not actually correct, he said, because I had found some speakers in the 80s who actually had the infinitive in their grammar. So from that point onwards, and since I was an expert on infinitives, because that was actually the topic of my PhD dissertation, I decided to try to find out about it and document it. And that's exactly what I did. So this is the sort of story I'm going to tell today. And I hope you enjoy it as much as I have been enjoying doing it the last 10 years. But before actually I tell you more about my fieldwork and why the fieldwork was so critical and so important, a few contextualization points. As we shall see, my claim in the literature has been that this is a very archaic form of Greek, still spoken in the Black Sea in Turkey. But the question is, how come it has survived to this day? Well, I think Nick actually said a few things about it, and I'm sure that for an audience like you, this is all very well known. We know that in 1923, there was the Treaty of Lausanne between the two newly established national states of Greece and Turkey, which essentially used the Treaty of Lausanne to settle unfinished business. And by that, I mean to devise a plan about how to get rid of unwanted populations. So whoever was Muslim in Turkey, but Greek-speaking, could stay, but of course all Christians had to relocate to Greece, and likewise all Muslims in Greece who were unwanted, they had to relocate to Turkey. Now that essentially means that the fundamental criterion for the exchange of populations was religious, which by extension, it also meant that whoever was actually Muslim but spoke Greek, they didn't have to go anywhere. And that is precisely what happened. And this is why these populations in the Trabzon area, why they're surviving to this day, okay? Essentially because they're all Muslim populations. And here we can take a closer look. So I have actually done my field work in a village which is south of Uzungöl, which is the known also in the literature with the name of Sarajevo. The name of the village which I'm using a codified name in the literature, is the village of Anasta. So, and it is actually, as I said, more inland than Uzungöl, which is a wonderful, beautiful village, very touristy, I should say. My village is even more beautiful, I should say. This is where I have been doing my research. Now, this constitutes one enclave, one, if you like, a group of varieties, okay, which we call ophitic or Chaikara. And then there is another group of varieties spoken by Muslim communities in this area, which is the Sürmene area. Of course, historically, there were Greek-speaking communities in the entire area. And of course, as we know, in the Argyroupoli area as well, which is here in the Gümüşhane. But today, the only surviving enclaves is the one in Chaikara, which I have already mentioned, the one in Sürmene, which is a smaller part of the Greek-speaking Sürmene, which is this area here. And then the third one is the enclave of Tonya. Okay, but as I've mentioned, most of my research actually is about Chaikara, Romeyka spoken in the area of Chaikara in a village south of Uzungöl. So now I'm going to tell you more about my fieldwork. Thanks to the inspiration and the support of Professor Mackridge, I read whatever literature was available. We've exchanged contacts, and I started dreaming of the fieldwork. And I'm saying dreaming because, of course, as you can imagine, it was not obvious how to get there, how actually to meet native speakers. All the more when what I want to do was use the ethnographic method in order to collect my data. So what is this ethnographic method and why do I deem it so important? The ethnographic method essentially says, you're not going there with just a questionnaire, a written questionnaire, you get some data and you go away and you never go back. The ethnographic method is all about really being able to observe the community, get to know the community, allow quite a lot of time for this thing to happen. Nothing should happen in a rushed way, because if it happens in a rushed way, you're probably going to reach wrong sort of conclusions. You're not going to get good quality of data. Whereas actually, if you're given the opportunity to live with families, to live within the community, then you will get a more authentic experience. And essentially, this means better quality of data. Perhaps the easiest thing to think about it is think how you would feel if someone shows up on your doorstep with a piece of paper asking you to fill in some data. Let's say you do it and you never see them again. I mean, you may do it very hastily. You may have, you may be cooking, you may be cleaning, you may have been interrupted. The sort of data you are going to give may not actually be the most, if you like, authentic judgments. By employing the ethnographic method, essentially, we ensure great quality of data. And great quality of data is of paramount importance because there is nothing like this data in the historical record. Romeyka, and in fact, Pontic Greek, it doesn't have a medieval presence, okay, which is something I will be returning to. Essentially by that, I mean, we don't have very early texts written in Pontic Greek, okay? Now you may be wondering why this is the case. And the brief answer is because there was a diglossic world. Essentially when dialectal speakers needed to write, they were writing in the high register and not in the way they were speaking at the time. So that actually put, if you like, more pressure on me on getting good quality of data. Now, thanks to my training at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, I was fortunate enough to have an amazing professor of ethnolinguistics, and I was actually properly trained. Lukas was his name. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, and he was a great teacher. So I was actually very much, I had this sort of training. And in fact, during my first degree, I used this training to collect data from the Romani speakers of the Andropotamus in Thessaloniki, which is, as some of you may know, a gypsy community. That's how I wanted to get this data, and that's actually how I've managed to get my data. So I was designing my questionnaires. These were very sort of sophisticated syntactic questionnaires, which I would quite often calibrate in situ, because you can start with something in paper, you think you know what you're looking for, but of course, when you're exposed to data, you need actually to make all sorts of adjustments, which is exactly what I did. And then I started collecting the data orally, because most of these people actually, especially the older women, wouldn't know how to read and write. So of course, written questionnaires wouldn't make any sense. But the most important thing, and in fact, the thing I'm more proud of, is that by the second field trip, I was actually able to do monolingual data collection. So I used the opportunities presented to me in the first field trip to absorb as much of the language as possible. And then towards the end of the first field trip, I started actually using it. I'm learning it essentially and using it quite poorly, but still very much determined to use it. And by my second trip, actually, I could do much more. I spent some time figuring things out for myself. And most of the times, actually, I was shameless and fearless about not using it properly. Of course, the more I was doing it, the more fluent I was becoming, the more exciting everything was becoming, the more I could understand, the more interesting conversations I can have with the women, and the better quality of data I could get for this research. I should say that it became obvious quite early during my fieldwork that the female speakers were actually speaking a more Archaising variety of Romeyka. And that is actually when I actually decided to focus on female participants rather than actually using male participants. Of course, I had recordings of participants speaking Romeyka, but I was actually paying much more attention to the women. The men also had to leave the villages. They had to find a job elsewhere, because these are very difficult communities, in the sense of difficult for employment, because there are very few things you can do. So men would very often go on the courbette and essentially go and work elsewhere, make some money, and then visit the villages on special occasions. So of course, that means that they had much more exposure to Turkish and to other languages. So that also affected their grammar, not in a bad way. I actually find this language contact phenomena totally fascinating, and they merit a study themselves. But because I was very much there to capture the vanishing infinitive, which actually proved not to be so vanishing, I should say, in these female speakers, I wanted to work with women. The other reason is that it was much easier actually to communicate with the women. I had a fantastic, absolutely amazing reception. I felt extremely welcome, and it won't be an understatement to say that I had the time of my life. Every single field trip I have taken, it was an amazing experience, and I was showered with love, care, and attention. And hopefully I was able to reciprocate that. You can see here some information about the size of my corpus. This is an untagged corpus. So if anyone wants to do a PhD with me, please do get in touch. I've got lots of data. So you can, if you go on the website that Nick kindly advertised earlier, you can find the research. I should also mention that I'm publishing most of the articles on academia.edu as well, so you can actually find them there. And I'm also very pleased to say that the publications you see here as either in prep or submitted, they have actually been published. So it is an ongoing research, and there are many research outputs so far, with more to come. And perhaps you would like to ask me during question time, what about writing a grammar? And then I'll give you my answer, but perhaps not now. So what I would like to focus now for the remaining, for the remainder of the talk is to show you why I claimed what I claim, which is the Hellenistic roots of the Pontic Greek infinitive. And you may actually wonder at this stage, well, Ioanna, don't we always kind of say, don't we always assume that Pontic Greek has classical Greek, ancient Greek roots? And then my reaction to this claim would be, well, this is a claim. How do you prove such a claim? And who has actually proven this claim? Because it is one thing to make such a claim, and it is a completely different thing to use a technical explanatory framework to do so. And this is actually what I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you how I actually think, I should always add the word think, how I think I have proven the Hellenistic Greek origins of the Romeyka infinitive. And again, at this stage, you may wonder, why Hellenistic? Why not ancient Greek? And this is definitely something I will be explaining later on. But let me just say at this stage that to make a claim of the type Pontic Greek actually descends from ancient Greek is a very problematic statement if you make it in such an absolute way without any sort of restrictions or addenda or some sort of additional context. The reason being that in the literature by very important scholars on the history of Greek, it has been argued that all current modern Greek dialects are actually not descending from classical Greek, not even from Hellenistic Greek, but they are in fact descending from medieval Greek or even later. So you can actually see here, we have a kind of a puzzle. Okay, on the one hand, people, very important people like Horrocks, have actually claimed that there are no dialects spoken today which can be traced back to ancient Greek. And on the other hand, we have this sort of almost like a rumor, if you like, claim that Pontic Greek descends from classical Greek. And my position is neither Horrocks' position nor the sort of extreme position that Pontic Greek actually descends from classical Greek. This is by no means the case, and you shall see how my position has been formulated. But actually, let me say something more. But I'm going to say something more about how we can actually investigate such questions, because the question of a methodology, as I said, it is of paramount importance, because we need to find, if you like, more theoretical arguments, and we need to have some sort of framework to allow us to evaluate what we've got. If we don't set out such a framework, we can say pretty much whatever we like, but it would have very little importance, I would think. So the way I worked was by reworking, if you like, the traditional reconstruction method. And I'm not going to bore you with too many technical details, but the idea is the following. I had decided that I would first document the infinitive in Romeyka, and by that I mean to understand the syntax of the infinitive as currently spoken by Romeyka speakers. So first task was actually to understand the grammar behind the Romeyka infinitive today. And then I would take these findings and compare them and contrast them to previous stages of Greek. So then I would compare the syntax of Romeyka, the syntax of the infinitival syntax of Romeyka today, to the syntax of the medieval infinitive, to the syntax of the Hellenistic infinitive, and to the syntax of the ancient Greek infinitive. And at whatever point I find that the distributions give me a better match, then I will scrutinize more. And in fact, when I did that, I actually found that the best match was actually provided by Hellenistic Greek and medieval Greek. So I couldn't find enough evidence actually to postulate that this is a continuation of the ancient Greek infinitive, but I found plenty of evidence that it is the continuation of Hellenistic Greek infinitive. Now you may ask, and you shall see the evidence, why not a medieval Greek infinitive? Well, it has many of the characteristics of the medieval Greek infinitive, but crucially, it has more, which are clearly Hellenistic. And without these Hellenistic traces, the Romeyka infinitive wouldn't have existed, okay? I have more slides in case I get some more technical questions, but the gist of my method, as I said, was the comparative method. So let me actually show you now some of my data. And remember, I'm just focusing here on the infinitive. There is much more data about from many speakers. Now, the data for the infinitive, I worked with a pool of, let's say, 10 female participants. So I have checked this distribution with quite a few women, and they all had a very similar, or identical, I should say, distribution. And the first curious thing is actually the example that you see on the slide. So the women would use the infinitive as in the example in one, uche poresa mai repsini, I couldn't cook. So the infinitive is this form, cook, and some of you may recognize this ini as kind of being reminiscent of a Greek infinitival ending. And indeed, this form qualifies as an infinitive. What was immediately quite interesting was that there seemed to be very specific context in which you can use the infinitive. So you couldn't use the infinitive in a wide range of contexts, which was quite surprising and very puzzling. And Peter Mackeridge actually had noticed something similar himself, and he was totally puzzled by this. So when, for instance, I tried to see if my speakers would yield an infinitive with similar type of verbs, similar to verbs, to modal verbs, other modal verbs. The verb I can is actually a modal verb. And there are similar types of verbs which behave alike, behave in a similar way. But crucially, I couldn't find any such examples. The second, if you like, puzzling aspect of the syntax of the Romeyka infinitive was, whereas I could say, speakers would say things like, I couldn't cook, I couldn't sleep, they couldn't say, I could sleep, and have an infinitive there. So it seemed like you needed to have the negative, the negation, which was very weird, because if any of you speak any Romance language, if you speak Spanish, for instance, you would know that there isn't such an restriction. You can say things like, puedo dormir, no puedo dormir. I can sleep, I can't sleep. Whereas actually the Romeyka infinitive really needed this negation. And the other very curious thing is actually what you see in example C, which is that in fact you can't have an infinitive if the verb can is in the present tense. Okay, so you can't say things like chi poro chimithini, I can't sleep. You can only use it when the verb is in the past tense. Uche poresa chimithini, I couldn't sleep. Uche poresa mairepsini, I couldn't cook. So this was very, if you like, very restrictive type of distribution, very puzzling type of distribution. And to make things actually a little bit more puzzling, let me present you two more contexts in which we find this infinitive. And one context is these before clauses, okay? Before I did something. So, πριν σπουδήσουν στο Mandarin, chi pao. Before I clean the barn, I'm not leaving, I'm not going anywhere. So when we have this prin, we actually also, speakers would also produce an infinitive. And the final context in which female speakers would produce an infinitive is the so-called counterfactual context. So the counterfactual context is when you have things like, I wish I could have walked to the mountains, but in fact I didn't, okay? If I had earned a lot of money, I would have built a house, but actually I haven't earned any money and I didn't build a house. So to summarize, there were, okay? And I hope you were able to hear one of my female speakers producing the infinitive here. So to summarize the distribution of the Romeyka infinitive is what you see on the slide. We can find it in counterfactual conditionals of the type if I had cooked, as a complement to negated past tense verbs of modal verbs, so things like I couldn't cook, and in the so-called before clauses, before I cook. Now, by any known standard in the literature on infinitives, this was unique. This was actually extremely bizarre and unexpected. And I'm not going to lie, I spent quite a few years pulling my hair trying to figure it out. And then I actually had the opportunity to read the work by a great Greek semanticist in the States, Anastasia Giannakidou. And then something clicked actually. And what clicked was that this infinitive actually did not function anymore as the normal infinitive, but in fact it became some sort of a polarity item, as we say in the syntax. So essentially, if you think about what these three contexts have in common, is the fact that they express something which is not true, okay? What we call is actually, or what we call in the more technical literature is anti-veridical. So when you say, if I had cooked, it means that you didn't cook. If you say, I couldn't cook, essentially it means that you didn't cook. And there is a similar analysis for the before clauses. So it looked like that this infinitive was behaving like a negative polarity item. The sort of items that we have in English when we have examples like, I didn't see anyone. You get anyone because you've got negation. Otherwise, you can't say, I saw anyone. Okay, you need the negation for anyone to surface. So something very funny has happened to the syntax of the Greek infinitive in Romeyka, and has actually transformed itself to this negative polarity item. And in fact, as I'm going to argue, and as I have argued back in 2014 in one of my papers in Diachronica and Lingua, was actually that it has been reanalyzed as a negative polarity item, which in fact ensured its survival. But let me kind of explain why I think that could not have happened if we were simply dealing with a medieval Greek infinitive. And to explain this, let's take a step back and consider ancient Greek before clauses. So you have an example from ancient Greek with a before example, trini pi Thessalonica kon logon. And you can actually, we all know, or those of us who know modern Greek, know that in modern Greek, the infinitive did not survive, and in fact it was replaced by na clauses. And as I have said, the infinitive is only found in Romeyka, and it is also found in some Southern Greek varieties, okay, Southern Italian Greek varieties, I'm sorry. But I should say that these varieties of these Greek varieties found in Southern Greece cannot actually be accounted the same way, because I have looked at the distribution of the infinitive there, and it is very much a medieval Greek infinitive, okay? So this is something to bear in mind. So why have I claimed that this is Hellenistic? It is Hellenistic because, in fact, we have the survival of the before plus infinitive construction. And this is extremely important because the before plus infinitive construction, which, as we have already seen, existed in classical Greek, did not survive in medieval Greek. Okay, and this is extremely important, okay, because what that shows us is that this variety of Greek spoken in the Black Sea, Romeyka, must date at least as far back as Hellenistic Greek. And although it, of course, stayed in touch with other medieval varieties as time moved on, clearly, it was not a variety that emerged during medieval times, because if it had emerged during medieval times, it wouldn't have maintained this Hellenistic Greek construction. Okay, so this is actually very important. I had some very good colleagues at Cambridge, Professor David Holton and his team, scanning lots of medieval Greek data for me. They have a great database, and now they have actually written a great grammar of medieval Greek, and they found very few examples of before plus infinitive in the medieval Greek record. And the only examples, in fact, that we found were examples in the so-called high register texts, which essentially they were trying to mimic, if you like, to imitate the language of classical Greek. So the major point is that before plus infinitive did not survive in medieval Greek. Before plus infinitive has survived in Romeyka, and the only way to account for that is actually by going one step backwards, okay, in the chronological axis, and this would be the Hellenistic Greek period. Of course, some other features of the Romeyka infinitival distribution show that it follows the similar sort of development as the one we find in medieval Greek. And that's why I said that Romeyka sprang out of Hellenistic Greek, but it was not completely cut off from developments happening in other Greek varieties during medieval times. But the contact with other medieval Greek varieties was actually interrupted, if you like. It was happening in a leapfrog manner. It was not actually continuous. And I have another piece of proof as to why the Romeyka infinitive dates back to Hellenistic Greek. Now, Hellenistic Greek, not only it had before clauses like classical Greek, but in fact it innovated before clauses in allowing a special sort of syntax that we technically call accusativus cum infinitivo. And there is a very famous example, which I'm sure you can all recognize. And in this sort of example, what we see is that the subject of who is doing the crowing is actually not the same as the subject of a matrix clause. I mean, I haven't added the continuation, but we know that we know how it goes, and it's actually not the same one. And crucially, this did not exist in classical Greek. So in classical Greek, you cannot have the accusativus cum infinitive construction in before clauses. But as I said, Hellenistic Greek innovated in this way. Now, there was not much point looking for that in medieval Greek, because medieval Greek hardly had any before plus infinitive constructions. But Romeyka, curiously enough, it actually also had syntax. So you can say things like, πριν πισίνη φαΐνια είσαι, εγώ τσιπάω. So in this example, we can actually see that the person, the subject who is doing the cooking, for the preparing the food, is actually Aishe, and the subject of the verb chipao is I. They are not the same. Okay, so we find exactly the same innovative syntax in before clauses as we find it in Hellenistic Greek. So for me, that was, if you like, the second very important piece of evidence as to why we had to account for it and it has the Greek infinitive. So again, I'm not going into more details. You can read all about it in the paper, in the papers that I have published, but essentially what I have argued was that it was a Hellenistic Greek infinitive, and then also showing some of the distributions found in medieval Greek. And in fact, what Romeyka speakers were doing was reanalyzing it in a very novel way. And essentially for them in their syntax today, it functions as a negative polarity item. Now, we probably know, we're not going to have time to tell you about other strands of my research pertaining to negation, but perhaps just to kind of whet the appetite for what is going to come. In my forthcoming work, I'm going actually to show that Romeyka has a very complex system of negators, a very prima facie exotic system of negations, having as many as 6 negators. Okay, I'm not going to say more about it. Hopefully we shall have more opportunities in the future for me to explain why, again, this is a very interesting grammar, and how in fact we still can account for that in terms of Hellenistic Greek. So I'm just going to kind of move the presentation a bit forward. Okay, which is essentially the point where I'm going to summarize my position. So the thesis I had advocated for into 2014 was that the Romeyka varieties still spoken in the area, and by extension all Pontic Greek varieties, have Hellenistic roots with a type of leapfrog contact, like the sort of the way the frog actually moves, which is not like contiguous, taking contiguous steps, but actually by means of leaping, essentially as a metaphor for discontinuous interrupted contact, and with other medieval Greek varieties. So my position is that these are Hellenistic Greek and localized Hellenistic Greek variety with many sort of local features, which all whereas also in contact with other Greek varieties during medieval times, but crucially this contact was actually interrupted, discontinuous. And you can actually see here the sort of schematization, how I schematize this sort of phylogeny. Okay, and this is the genealogical tree for Asia Minor Greek. I should also say at this stage that it looks like a very sort of sophisticated phylogeny, but I can assure you that there are still extremely important questions for historical linguists. So for instance, we're not exactly sure whether there was a Cappadocian Proto-Pontic or a Proto-Cappadocian Proto-Pontic variety. And we're kind of speculating here, where we cannot be certain if it was first Proto-Cappadocian, which then later yielded Pontic Greek, or in fact it was a Proto-Pontic then yielding Cappadocian. There are so many, if you like, important puzzles for us to try and solve. So just a few words to before I finish my my lecture, and these actually have to do with the future of this variety. Nick very ably commented on why this variety has actually become endangered. It is in fact gravely endangered, and because of the technological advancements, because of the pace of life, because of globalization, and in fact that essentially means that younger generations are to Turkish, so they are becoming monolingual in Turkish, and they're losing Turkish, Romeyka bilingualism. I actually met most of my informants were females above the age of 60, for whom Turkish was actually an L2, a second language. Essentially, this means that they were not exposed to Turkish since birth, but they actually picked it up later in life. A few of them went to school, so they were exposed to Turkish at school, but others actually, as they said to me, they learned Turkish because of the television, pretty much. But of course, this situation is changing very fast in the younger generations. And I should also say that I was very fortunate to be able to live in a household with 4 generations, okay, which was wonderful because I could see how language is passed on and how transmission happens. Of course, the pace of change in the Rumca communities in Istanbul is much more accelerated for obvious reasons. They are living in a big, megapolis, which essentially means that they are using Turkish pretty much exclusively. And they also means that they have slightly different attitudes, sociolinguistic attitudes towards Romeyka. However, to finish on a kind of a high note, I should tell you that the stance of my female speakers in the village of Anasta was extremely positive. So I had females telling me things like, we didn't learn it when we were young, referring to Turkish. We cannot put it in my head, referring to Turkish. We will always speak Romeyka. So that shows, this is a statement which shows their commitment to their ancestral language. And to a question that I was asking them, what would you do if you can't speak Romeyka anymore? If something happens and this is not an option anymore, they would say, we will secretly speak it. If they didn't allow me to speak it, I would continue speaking it. And that shows the sort of connection to the mother tongue, which is a very strong one. Okay. I ran out of time, which is usually the case. These are actually just showing you the sponsors for this research, which is the University of Cambridge, a research fellowship I got from the Center for Hellenic Studies at Harvard. And I also had the Stanley J. Seeger research fellowship at Princeton. I also had, I was greatly benefited by a small grant by a British Academy, and I just got another small grant by the British Institute at Ankara. So this is for me, and I would be very happy to have your questions.
Okay. Costa? Oh. Ioanna, what can I say? No tengo palabras. I'm just lost for words. Really incredible stuff, incredible research. And I hope there were some budding and potential PhD students in the audience tonight as well. It's very inspiring, and keep up the good work. We do have quite a few questions that have come through the chat function. Had quite a few international followers tonight, which is good to see. I'll read the first one from Engin Choban. I was born and raised in Machka. I think that's Matuka. My family still lives there. There is another region, another village where the Romeyka language, another way to describe it, is very strong. A neighboring village name is Kushtul, but I think it's an older dialect than Tonya and Chekara. Do you have any information about this topic?
So thank you so much for this. This is great to hear, actually. In the literature, Machka is actually not reported as one of the remaining enclaves. But quite frankly, I'm taking such caution at everything I read these days, because of course, you know, it captures how we understood things at the previous stage, and does not necessarily reflect reality. So you're giving me some very interesting information. I've heard about some Romeyka speaking villages in Machka, but I've never had any sort of first-hand experience myself. I'm always a bit cautious because I'm sure you know, in our sort of Cara Denis culture, we make all sorts of big statements. It is kind of, you know, that's what we do. But unless I have a speaker from there, and unless I have first-hand experience, I cannot put it on the map yet. But the maps and everything that I have shown you is this is up for revision, and it will be revised, and it should be revised. This is what good science is all about. We're constantly trying to enrich our understanding of the languages, of the language contact, of the history of the languages. So please do get in touch with me, either via the website or send me an email, and I would be delighted to arrange for an online interview or some sort of way of finding out about the data, and then I shall be able to tell you more about it. Historically, of course, as we know, in the Machka area, there were Greek speakers, like pretty much everywhere in the Black Sea area. Okay, so it wouldn't be surprising if we have another Greek-speaking enclave in Machka today. As I said, in the literature, we don't find any information about this, but it may well needs to be revised.
A question from Petros. Thank you for your presentation. What is your general opinion on the loss of language diversity throughout the world? And do you see knowledge and cultural loss inevitable when a language vanishes? Are there any language storage banks similar to the Svalbard Global Seed Vaults in Norway, for example?
Right, that's a great question. I'm sad. Okay, I'm sad. I'm sad about loss of diversity. I'm very sad about losing languages and heritages. However, I should say that my job as a linguist, but also my sort of world view, if you like, is not about me telling people what they should and shouldn't do. Okay, I have a very sort of laissez-faire type of approach when it comes to that. I cannot tell my speakers, you need to maintain Romeyka, you need to do this. I do what I do in the hope that I will show the importance, but I don't adopt a very sort of a strict and prescriptive stance towards it. The good news is that as we lose languages, other new languages are emerging because variation is inherent to human language. So that is, I think, is very important to realize that we're losing variation, but at the same time, we're gaining variation. But of course, as it is typically the case, that would only be acknowledged much later down the line, because we have this sort of tendency of only appreciating standard languages, prestigious languages with prestigious, I mean, in the sense of having literary records. So yes, I'm very sad. But at the same time, I don't believe that we should tell speakers what they should do. Speakers would need to do what they need to do. And we were talking with Nick earlier, just before the start of the lecture. There are speakers actually who lost Pontic Greek because they had to do that for their own reasons. And but they still identify as Pontic Greek, and they are found in Georgia and in other parts. That's perfectly okay. You know, speakers need to do what they need to do, okay? As a linguist, of course, I'm sad because I try to capture as much of that as possible.
And next question from Evan. How long did you stay in the village with the ladies you were studying?
So I had 5 trips, and the longest I could stay in each trip was actually 10 days, but one trip actually was shorter. So not a very long time, actually. on the whole. I haven't spent a year, for instance, okay? But because it was monolingual, it was very, very intense. By that I mean I didn't have an interpreter or anything, at least after the second field trip.
Question from Thanos, I think you might have answered this. Are there different dialects of Pontiaca in different villages?
Absolutely, and that's an excellent question. Again, what we call Pontic Greek is you should know, it's a very sort of complicated question, because there are many different varieties under the label of Pontic Greek. Of course, we need labels because we need to use them heuristically, and they still capture something, but that doesn't mean that we should use them in a way which does not acknowledge variation, and there is a great deal of variation. So we can identify, for instance, Pontic Greek being split into Muslim Pontic Greek, which is now referred to as Romeyka, and then Christian Pontic Greek, which is now referred to as Pontic Greek. And then within Pontic Greek, we can have Argyroupoli Pontic Greek, Samsun Pontic Greek, and so on and so forth. And within Romeyka, we have seen the three enclaves, Chaikara, Tonia, and Surmene. And according to our friend, we may as well need to add Machka. So yes, there is a great deal of variation within Pontic Greek. And this is something to be studied and enjoyed, actually. That's why I don't believe that we should be all learning one single variety, a standard sort of variety of Pontic Greek, or aspiring to acquire a standardized form of Pontic Greek. We should be celebrating variation in this respect.
A question here from Vicky. Is there any connection between surviving variety of Greek spoken in northeastern Turkey and remaining folklore elements?
Not sure I understand that question very well. And remaining
folklore elements.
Yeah. Folklore elements. Sorry.
Are they language related?
Right. Look, this is not my specialization, and I take things very seriously because I do this work in a very scientific way. I'm a trained syntactician. So whatever I tell you is impressionistic, okay? Probably it wouldn't be wise to talk about that, but I can share my sentiment if you like. And my sentiment was, when I was doing field work, that it felt like I was with my grandmother. It felt very familiar to me. I should mention that I'm of Pontic Greek extraction. Both sides of my family are actually Pontic Greeks from Gümüşhane. So it felt very, very familiar. But I'm afraid I can't give a more authoritative type of answer because I'm not doing these sort of studies. This is not my area.
A question, what is the actual population of Romeyka speaking enclaves you have studied? So,
right, again, this is right. This is a great question, and this is the first question that everyone asks me. And they actually have, when I give the answer, I don't know, people don't like my answer, but I will explain why this is very hard to give a number and why numbers create impressions, but how you get the numbers is a total mystery, and I'll explain why. There is a number of 5,000 or 4,500 and something in the literature, firstly reported by Peter Mackridge, and this is a number he got from from the last census. Now, as we know, people record information in the census or not recording information in the census because of various reasons. Sometimes they record this, sometimes they do not record it. So we cannot take this number at face value simply because it was an official number. Now, the other problem in giving a number is my aim was not actually to go village by village and measure things, okay? Okay, this is a village, how many speakers have we got? 500. I go to the next village, how many speakers have we got? 400 or whatever. No. My goal was to understand one single community, one community at a time. And for me, this is much more important than doing a quantity, okay? The third reason why this is very difficult to come up with a number is because who are you going to include as a speaker of Romeyka? Are you going to include L1 speakers of Romeyka, the grandmothers aged 60 and above? Are you going to include small children who only end up speaking a few words of Romeyka? Are you going to include people in Istanbul who have a memory of their grandmothers speaking Romeyka, but they speak no single word of Romeyka? How are you going to count? Okay, because there are different populations with different sort of linguistic repertoires, and we need to kind of establish some criteria. I can definitely tell you that in my village, everyone spoke Romeyka, and it was a large village, close to 800 people. Okay, and I know that, again, not because I have spoken to 800 people, I have spoken to at least 100 people, I should say, in that village. But that's what everyone was reporting. Okay.
These questions are quite difficult in multilingual societies. It's like saying how many Greek speakers in Australia. Where do you stop counting? Question from our last week's speaker, Dr. Ioanna. Greetings, Violeta. Thank you very much for this fascinating talk. How does Romeyka compare with Pontic Greek spoken today or in the recent past in Greece or in the Caucasus?
That's again an excellent question, totally fascinating one. I've made some claims about this relationship in my 2014 paper in Diachronica, and you've seen some slides today. Of course, they share a great deal of features, absolutely, and there is intelligibility and mutual comprehension. However, the grammars are not identical, and in fact, as I have claimed, the grammar of the Romeyka speakers in the Black Sea today is more archaizing than the variety spoken by Pontic Greeks in Greece. Okay, the reason for that is actually historical, and it has to, as I explained in my 2014 article, and it has to do with the following situation. Around 16th and 17th century, as reported by Vrionis, for instance, in the literature, there were Islamizations in the area. So some groups of Pontic Greek speakers were actually becoming Muslim, they were Islamized, and that was a progressive sort of process. Now, once a community was actually converting to Islam, what happened was that there was some sort of, if you like, rupture or isolation. It may not have been a rupture. I mean, we don't know that, but definitely these communities actually became much more isolated. As they became isolated, they were able to maintain these archaic features, whereas actually the Christian Pontic Greek communities between the 16th and the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, they were intensifying contact with continental Greek. Okay, so let me just remind you of the fact that we had teachers coming from Greece to teach at the Pontic Greek schools in the Black Sea villages in the 19th and 20th, early 20th century. So they were in closer and closer contact with modern Greek, which actually led to some of their regional archaizing features to become attrited. Okay, so this is my historical explanation. So technically speaking, the Romeyka speakers in Turkey's Black Sea today speak a more archaic variety of Pontic Greek than the Pontic Greeks in Greece.
Another question from John. Are there any sort of similar Romeyka dialects on the other side of the Black Sea that have been studied or that we know of?
Absolutely. Are you referring to the North Black Sea? Absolutely. Of course, we have Mariupol, Greek, and there are many other varieties. These varieties are fundamentally very close to the Pontic Greek variety spoken by Christians. They don't have these archaizing features. Essentially, I have looked for these archaizing features. 2 years ago, I was in Armenia, and I visited a Greek-speaking village, and they didn't, I mean, in the hope of, finding something exciting. No, in fact, they all spoke Pontic Greek. I mean, the speakers I spoke to, they spoke Pontic Greek the way Pontic Greek is spoken by Christians in Greece today. I mean, I'm sure there are some individual features which are not identical, obviously, because of the substrate, but I couldn't find the infinitive, basically. So if we make if we make a taxonomizer out of the infinitive, my answer is I wasn't able to find it in any other Pontic Greek variety aside from the ones that I was talking about in the lecture today.
Ioanna, I might just sneak in one final question because I think we can be here till midnight. Also, I'm very conscious of your time as well. Have you done any research, or has any research been done on the language spoken by Christian Muslims in Turkey?
There is some research, and if anyone has any sort of specific interest, I'm happy to send bibliography. I should, however, say that no trained syntactician has actually looked at this data. And why do I make such a big fuss about the need for having someone trained in syntax to take a look, and in fact trained in diachronic syntax? It is because of how technical and rigorous this subdiscipline is actually. So we still need a lot of work to be done on all Greek varieties, because they all contribute a very important piece of information in what we call the evolution of the Greek language. So there is some work, but quite limited, I would say. And still scope for a lot of work. So if anyone is out there and they have good marks and proper training, and they want to keep learning and do more training, and they want to eventually do a PhD, I would be delighted to hear.
Sorry, Anna, I might just ask one more question.
I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere. Go for it.
Is any work on what aspects of language were influenced by the society around them? Were the women involved in your work, the general and society around them, isolated because of cultural aspects? So we can extrapolate about Greek in our situation. Also, how did the Greek language of Asia Minor relate to Pontian? So.
Right. I mean, there are two very different questions, actually. Very nice questions as well. As I have mentioned during my lecture, the women had to stay in situ. So I met women that they have never been to Trabzon. I met women that they have, of course, never been to Istanbul. So they spent their entire lives in the village. Okay, so the reason for that is not cultural in the sense of or religious or anything like that. To the extent that I understand it, but it is also has to do with the reality of their situation. If your husband needs to go on the kurbet to earn some money, and he needs to go to Istanbul, or he needs to go to Antalya, or he needs to go to Ankara, or he needs to go to Bursa, or he needs to go to Belgium or Paris or France or Germany, and becomes essentially an economic migrant, then someone has to stay behind and take care of the house, take care of the kids. Very few families, especially until recently, were moving as a whole to the location where the husband would have employment. Also because some of this employment is a bit more precarious in nature, so they didn't see much point taking the entire family with them. In this respect, what these women did was not so different from what was happening to Christian Pontic Greek families from Gümüşhane, for instance, where I am from, in the beginning of the 20th century and end of the 19th century. So, for instance, male members of my family would actually go to Crimea and actually in the Krasnodar area to find jobs, and they would kind of commute back and forth for many years. I mean, sparingly commute, I should say, before eventually the entire family moving with them to these locations. So in this respect, it's actually what was happening in the area for a very long time. Men have to go elsewhere to find jobs to provide for the families. Women stay behind to take care of the house, to take care of the kids, and of course the animals and the crops and everything. The second question, I think I won't make justice to the second question, but of course I'm very much interested in what we call Asia Minor Greek. Of course, Asia Minor Greek is again a label which captures some similarities shared by Greek varieties spoken in Asia Minor, but it doesn't necessarily mean that at some point in time there was such a thing as one uniform variety, which was Asia Minor Greek. Okay, and as I said, in general, we still need to do a lot of work on Asia Minor Greek, especially when it comes to the reconstruction of the syntax of these varieties.
Thank you once again, Ioanna. I think because of COVID, you've probably been exposed to Australian audiences much sooner, but hopefully one day in the future, we'd like to see you in the flesh in Australia and meet the community here in Melbourne and its members. Continue the excellent research, stay in touch, and we do hope to have you sometime in the future as well. And thanks for participating in the series and accepting our invitation. So.
Well, thank you so much. It gave me great pleasure. It was wonderful meeting you and Kostas actually, and I sincerely hope I can meet as many of you as possible in real life soon rather than later. It is possible. So thank you very much. You've got an excellent panel of speakers, which was actually the main reason why I so much wanted to give a presentation to your community. So it seems like you're doing a great job. It is also fantastic news that you're introducing Pontic Greek language classes. So keep up with everything and let me know if I can help in any way. So thank you very much.
Ioanna, can you bid us good night or farewell in Romeyka, please, to finish off the seminar?
Καλά βραδίας. Okay, take care everyone. Take care. Bye.
Thank you once again. Costa, have we stopped recording? Κώστα, μπορούμε να μιλήσουμε ελεύθερα?